Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good whatever it is, wherever you are. And welcome to the latest installment of Tilton Talks Crypto with me, Martin Tillier. I'm the head of research at SmartFi. And more importantly, Aaron Tilton, the co founder and CEO of the company, who's going to give his words of wisdom and guide us through the stories and everything else. And we have a special guest this week that I think everybody will find really interesting.
Not only that, but endure the endless criticism of how many blue shirts that I have. I was looking at there, earlier you guys were talking
I
about.
got the memo. I did get the memo.
Well,
Look,
you're wearing a blue shirt, so you got
yeah.
it. You're good.
Well, my shirt choice is always based on one thing and one thing only, which is what is clean and not too crumpled. I
Yeah,
think that just makes me a man. It's
I
just
think
the way
that's
we
kind of
work.
standard. Yeah, awesome. Well, are you going to introduce our guest? Right, we've got an amazing figure in blockchain. Well, we would say blockchain history, and she's not historical in her own right because of her age, but just that what she's done. And I became aware of Amelia Commissioner Gardner. Gosh, I guess it was a few years ago when she was actually the clerk auditor for the Utah County, which is the second largest county in the state. Read a couple of articles, and I also follow politics. Obviously, as a recovering politician, I kind of keep track of some of those things. So I'd love to, when we get there, hear some insights, some of these other things about what she's done, because she has an amazing view on what can be done and what has been done. And we'll get to her in just a minute. But I know, Martin, you have a couple of things we got to cover before we get to Amelia.
Well, yeah, just a couple of basic things. Just again, say hi, welcome back, that kind of stuff. Let people know that we're giving away $50 of the SMTF token every week to the best question submitted via the various platforms that we're on. That's really important. Last week it went to, and I think we're going to have a banner up with the name on, because I'm not absolutely sure how
I couldn't even pronounce it. Cax? Is that what that is?
Star Privacy Matters kind of thing, whatever, however you want to pronounce that, but it's there with it. And that's kind of up there. And the question was, when will SFUSD will be released? Maybe we'll touch on that later.
Well, I can answer probably that here really quickly. It'll be within about the next 90 days, maybe, probably first quarter of 2023, but really early in the first quarter. And just for people who don't know what SFUSD is, that's our stablecoin, right? That allows a few things to be done innovatively with the platform. We'll get into that later about other things we're going to do with the platform, but that's when that will be coming out.
It's definitely, it was an interesting question because it's an interesting subject, and I'm sure it's something we'll get into in future.
We'll probably do a whole podcast on that stablecoin, the environment, everything that we're releasing.
Yeah, and the advantages of stablecoin. And I think some people think, well, why bother if you've got a coin that simply tracks US dollar value? But there's lots behind it that we need to get into at some point. Probably now is not the point, though, because what we're focused on this week is kind of historic progress, if you like, in the actual real world adoption of blockchain technology and in the crypto world in general. It's actually a good week to be doing it because it's kind of been an historic week in crypto for various reasons that we're going to talk about later. Most people are aware of the merge. The merge makes it sound like a Hollywood movie, but that's been dominating the conversation in the crypto world this week. So obviously that's something we're going to talk about. There's other subjects, outside of the crypto. I think mine is more of a market role within SmartFi. So, CPI and PPI came out this week. Now, I'm one of the few people in the world that actually gets excited about that. That means something to me. So we'll maybe touch on that and its relevance to the crypto world and the crypto markets. Lots to get to. And a lot of it we're going to do with the help of Amelia Powers Gardner, who's with us this week. I'll leave you, you know about it better than me. So if you want to do a full intro for Amelia, then I think it's probably better you do it, Aaron, in a way.
Yeah, so obviously, as I was mentioning before, I became aware of Commissioner Gardner a couple of years ago when she was a clerk auditor. And she was doing some really interesting things with blockchain already, one of which was voting. And I'm going to let her give the details of that. She knows that intimately, obviously. And then also issuing marriage licenses on blockchain. So the county had some first. And we had this little promo that I filmed earlier a couple of days ago about a historic place in blockchain, kind of an ignominious building where it's just the Utah County Administrative Building, but it's historic for that reason in blockchain. Also, there's some ties back to the early days of blockchain innovation. In the 90s, there's a professor, we have a little story to cover that. But in Utah County specifically, there's some history of blockchain that goes back, a couple of decades actually. So, but with that, also, Commissioner Gardner was the first woman in Utah County elected as a commissioner. So she's got a couple of historic things to her name. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Her and her husband, Tobin, live in Pleasant Grove. They have 6 children. And again, I'll let her talk a little bit more about that. But maybe, Paul, if we can bring her on. There she is.
Hey.
How are you, Commissioner?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, let's kind of just dive right into it. Maybe you could talk a little bit about historically, what was your introduction to blockchain technology and what was the basis for that and the context and the application for it later, or were you introduced to it when you were the clerk auditor, or, kind of give us a background. Tell us, how did that all come about?
Okay, so this is it's kind of a fun story how I actually got introduced to blockchain. So my husband, Tobin, and I, we've only been married for 4 years. And when we were dating, blockchain has been something that Tobin has been interested in for years. I think he downloaded his first crypto wallet in 2011. And when we were dating, when it was his turn to pick the movie on movie night, he would make me watch blockchain documentaries. That's a true story.
Gosh, what a horrible date. And you guys actually ended up getting married? How did that
happen? Right. Well, it gets even worse because some of our dates. Oh, yeah. Some of our dates, he'd be like, hey, we're going on a date tonight. And I'd be like, awesome. Where are we going? And he'd be like, we're going to a Ravencoin meetup.
Yeah.
Legitimately. Like, I ended up at like Ravencoin meetup.
Okay, I just want to say to other crypto enthusiasts out there. I just want to say to other crypto enthusiasts out there, don't take that as general dating advice.
No.
It maybe was fine with Amelia, but she's a pretty special. Most women aren't going to respond to that, just in case you want to get out there in crypto world.
That doesn't elevate your status, I can tell you that. But yeah.
Right. Like, here's the catch, though. I'm an engineer, so I'm very technical. I'm an automotive engineer. I worked at a large construction company, equipment manufacturing company for a dozen years. I'm a legitimate nerd. And so for me, I was actually really intrigued. So I never complained. I just thought it was, hey, whenever we go here, I learn new things. But it wasn't until I actually was clerk auditor that I saw the value for voting in blockchain. And we actually started with voting. And we were looking for ways to try to clean up the chaotic and messy voting process in our county. I don't know if you remember this, but the governor actually called our county prior to becoming the epicenter of dysfunction.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was his term. So that was actually a great soundbite for me to run on. It's like, why are you running for this position? Because I'm sick of living in the epicenter of dysfunction.
Yeah.
And so we started using blockchain technology for our overseas and military members to vote, because that was a secure way for them to cast their vote in areas where they weren't getting the mail-in ballots. And the only other option was to vote with email. And email is incredibly hackable. We can't verify their identity. And they have to waive their right to a secret ballot. And that didn't really sit with me.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, like in our state constitution, we have an unquestionable right to a secret ballot. But in order to vote with email, you actually have to waive your constitutional right to a secret ballot. So I found a way to utilize blockchain to do that. And then I started learning about hashing on a document so that you can prove that the document is an original, even though it's a digital document. So it wasn't photoshopped. So then that's when I started delving into this for the marriage license. So just really, I didn't come into office expecting to become a blockchain pioneer. I came into office to clean up a chaotic office. And then because I had all of this knowledge on blockchain from watching all these documentaries and going to all these meetups and conferences with my husband, I just started applying that in it just made sense. It solves real problems.
You were a little leery of like the marriage going in. You wanted to make sure that the marriage was solid, so you implemented marriage licenses on the blockchain. Is that what that was?
Yeah. So I was like, if it's in an immutable source, if it's in Ethereum, then we don't have a choice, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And Tobin's hook for good. Is your marriage license on the blockchain? That's what I want to ask, right?
Absolutely. I can pull it up on my phone and I can give you the Ethereum ID so you can track down what block it's in. Yeah, I got it.
Bed every time we talk to him. Hey, I got it.
Yeah, and then he pulls it up and he's like immutable.
Me, I think
yeah, there you go. That's awesome.
To me, I think that the interesting thing here is that that it's this practical application of what was a theoretical technology, and it reminds me of something, and the fact that you, Amelia, were the one to actually implement it and make it real, to me is significant, and it highlights a problem in the crypto world generally, because my wife always says, if you want something talked about it a lot, give it to a man. If you want something done, give it to a woman. And I think this is the case here, where actually the fact that, you as a woman, as one of the first women elected the county commissioner in Utah, which is a kind of crypto-friendly state, were the one to actually get this done, just tells us why we need more women in the crypto world and in the blockchain world generally. I wondered if you could speak to that kind of thing of being seen as not being seen as, but being a pioneer in the space. And do you feel a kind of a weight of responsibility there? Or are you leading the whole crypto world? I don't want to put too much weight on your shoulders, but it feels to me like you are.
It's really interesting, my journey here. So being a pioneer is actually in my DNA. My ancestry goes back to William Brewster on the Mayflower. And my ancestor, William Brewster, wrote the Mayflower Compact and came to the new land on the Mayflower. And then I have Jonathan Starr, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, fought in the Revolutionary War. And then my great-great-great-great-grandpa Henry walked on foot from Illinois across the Rocky Mountains to Utah. And it really is in my blood to be a pioneer. And so when I started doing these things, and I wasn't trying to be the first, I just happened to be the first. And as I started getting pushback, it really helped me understand, why I felt so compelled to run for public office. Being an engineer, I make a lot more money in the private sector. I make over twice as much money in the private sector than I do in public service. But I felt really drawn to public service. And as I'm able to make a real difference and to start implementing these changes, it's really fulfilling. And it helps me realize that this is where I need to be. I see one of the questions from one of the listeners talks about, what about birth certificates? I think that's a great example. I think we should do all of our government documents. If you start to think about it, every piece of documentation that you have that proves who you are, your birth certificate, your driver's license, your passport, your marriage license or your marriage certificate, every one of those is issued to you by a government. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the government controls access to it. So if you lose your paper birth certificate, you have to go back to the government and ask permission to get a new one. If you lose your driver's license, you go back to the government to ask permission for a new one. And what I would like to see is these government documents across the board put into basically an NFT that you can own a wallet to, that if you have those keys, it doesn't matter. You should be able to get access to it. You can prove your identity. And this really has global ramifications. The key, though, with the marriage licenses, we've done over 25,000 of them to date here in Utah County. And what we've proven is that it's possible. So I don't necessarily have the ability by myself to go through and affect this worldwide. But what I have done is shown that it's scalable and it's possible. And there's no reason we're not doing it broadly today.
Yeah, and that goes maybe another question when we get there is that on the task force you and I both sit on, what is it that you're hoping to achieve with your influence on the task force, and what initiatives for local, probably state governments, and political subdivisions of the state, I think is a technical term for that we can get accomplished for the state to demonstrate, one, that Utah is the place for blockchain distributed technology and cryptocurrencies, that Utah is the capital of that, not just because, one, we have a good tech community, right? We have a very significant tech community here, kind of Silicon Slopes, it's called. But how can we implement that so it's not only just free market solutions, but it's government of the people, by the people, for the people that are implementing these technologies to move it forward. When I was in the state legislature, obviously it's an elected position, but it's part-time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
County commissioner is full-time, but you're not going to be there forever. And Utah has this, I think, distinction of being known for a healthy skepticism of government, so that the people who get into government are watched, we hold them accountable, and they move on, right? They're not lifetime appointed kind of things. So what do you hope to get accomplished in the task force that represents that same ideological vein that's pervasive throughout our society in Utah?
Yeah, I think there's three things we can do. One of those is one of the reasons that I am so excited to be on the task force is because I can see practical application. So one of the most important things, like you said, a lot of times when we start talking about government committees, we start talking a lot of theory. And I want to be able to be there on the task force to show that this theory doesn't have to be theory, it can be fact. And so as people start talking about, what about this? What about this? What about this? I want to bring to them the knowledge on how to practically and actually get it done, right? So not just talk about the theory of maybe putting car titles on the blockchain, but let's actually implement it. So that's one. I bring the knowledge on how to do that, how to converge this theory and practicality and bring them together and make it a reality. The second thing that I think is really important is that as we move to a more digital world, there's two ways to do a digital world. There's a centralized authoritarian way to do a digital world, and there's a lot of people out there trying to do it. And then there's a decentralized sovereign way to do a digital world. And I think that one of our duties on the task force, one of the goals that I have, is to ensure that we build our systems in a decentralized sovereign way so that we don't have the government control. The whole purpose, in my mind, of putting a marriage license or a birth certificate or a driver's license on a blockchain is so that we have access to it without having to ask the government's permission. So that's really important.
Can I just briefly and say that for somebody listening, in a way, that to some people that will sound like almost like a party political point, but it isn't. I mean, government by the people, of the people, for the people, by the people, is not a partisan end point for government. It's a simple, it's a statement of freedom and liberty and everything else that we all believe in, or else we wouldn't be in this country, right? And even me as a foreigner, it's something that I embrace wholeheartedly. And you don't have to be of a particular.
It took you a while that you actually got here, right? That you came into the fold. It took
me a while, but I got it in.
And really, it's not only is it nonpartisan, but it's really not just a United States thing. I have dual citizenship with Canada. But let's look at refugees. Let's take a theory. Let's say that you're a woman who was living in Afghanistan when the Taliban took over. And all of a sudden, all of your bank accounts got seized and you had to flee the country. And when you left to flee the country, you didn't have time to stop by your house and open your fire safe and grab your birth certificates and your passport. So now you're stuck in a refugee camp in Turkey, and the UN is trying to get you into another country, but you have to be able to prove who you are so that those countries are willing to open their doors to you. If you had your digital documents, if you had all of your identity documents digitally and you knew your 12 phrase passkey, and you could access those documents, and then the government can now you can prove who you are to the UN so that you can become a refugee. I mean, it's not just an American ideology. I think every person deserves to be able to have their sovereignty, and every person should be able to prove who they are without having to ask a government's permission. And this becomes the case in third world countries. It becomes the case in countries where, I've actually been working with some folks in Latin American countries where you've got people that don't have the money to travel to the city so that they can register a marriage or a birth of a child, right? They had their baby at home in their village, and they don't have the money to go get a birth certificate for that child. If they had a way to do that digitally, then they've got access to that information.
It's really important. I was going to say, when I first got involved in crypto, I wasn't as early as your husband. I mean, it was like 2014. But for me, that was one of the things that occurred to me at the time that not many people were talking about back then, was the potential for cryptocurrencies and the blockchain to, as Aaron said in our intro and says so eloquently, move humanity forward. And not just to be the kind of plaything of the financial sector. God knows they have enough things to play with.
Right.
I was in it for long enough to know, how much we can distort things in that area. But rather to actually change people's lives on a fundamental level, because what we're doing is handing back control of their lives to them directly. And again, that's part of the evolution of government. That's part of the evolution of democracy. It's not a kind of again, not a partisan goal, not anything. It's just a human goal to give people domain over what is rightfully theirs. And that's what gets me excited about the whole crypto world. Is that it's not that I can make money out of it. That's nice, but that's not
right.
the whole thing.
I get asked all the time. I have people ask me. They say, "You've got 6 kids. Why are you doing this?" And I reply to them, I have 6 kids, and that is why I'm doing this, right? Like, number one, I mean, you always say, if you want to get something done, give it to a busy person. Well, when you have 6 kids, you don't just like mess around. Like, you get in, you get stuff done, you get out, right? Bath time takes a long time when there's 6 of them. Yeah. And so you just get in and you get stuff done and you get out. And so that's one reason I do it practically. But beyond that, I recognize that as we move into a metaverse, as we move into a digital age, I want my children to have their sovereignty. I want my children to be able to move forward and continue to live life in a way that allows them to not have to continually ask the government for permission.
Yeah, I mean, and when that was the reason I got into politics, was there was an undertone of taxation. Right. Mm-hmm. Utah's a really pretty conservative state fiscally. So there are a lot of other places, other states that I could have gone to or whatever to, try to run. Yeah. I mean, but I live in Utah. So, but when I got there and I realized that the ability for the government, and I was young, early 30s, to impinge on my rights or infringe on those rights, really you don't start to understand that until you lose a document, you lose something or control of property, or you have some decision by a bureaucrat go against you, right? And most teenagers, early 20s, they don't have that experience. Like, they don't until all of a sudden, sometime later there's some adjudication or something that happens that way. So what are the things that you would advise some of the younger people to do getting involved? And also, I always ask when we have elected officials on, how should somebody approach you to make a change? If they want to lobby for a change, if they want something new for a blockchain technology, or they want something like this at the county level, or any other reason, how should they approach you? What should they do to help you help them?
I think one of the most important things you can do when you approach an elected official or a government official is approach them like a partner, right? One of the worst things is when someone comes in and they pound their fist and they say, you're my servant, you work for me. And it's like, I did not sign up for indentured servitude. I am an engineer who came in to get things done. I'm here to try to make our community a better place. And if you approach me as a partner, like we're in this together, like, hey, I've got a great idea and I'm wondering if you can help me with it, that is absolutely the best thing that you can do. And realize that the majority of the people that go into public service, like you when you did and like me, we're here to make our community a better place. So that's the number one thing. And the number two thing, don't just go to them with problems, go to them with a solution. Don't just come and complain at us. Bring us a solution if you have one. I think that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, one of the things I always tell everybody too is that when you go there, be absolutely honest, about what the intentions are, the motivations, what the outcomes are that you think you should have, or any of these types of things. Because if you go there with an agenda, talking to somebody immediately, there's going to be skepticism. Just like any other transaction or any other kind of business deal or anything that you're going to look at doing, go there and be honest and tell them, I'm doing this for this reason, right? And I would say this, every elected official believes that there's an angle that somebody has when they come to you with it. And be transparent about that, right? That was one of the things I learned early on. You get approached by a lot of people that want you to do a lot of things, and you can tell when they're kind of like giving you half of the story, or not giving you all the details or whatever. And then you're like, well, okay. We had Senator Hemmerdahl. Well, I guess it's now he's in the governor's cabinet, but Senator Colmore, and the phrase always came up: "Tell me who's going to oppose this. Who might not like what you want me to do?" Yeah, and inform them, and then educate somebody. So with blockchain technology, you obviously did a lot of your own education beforehand, but now we're at task force. It's an opportunity for people to weigh in about what should we do with this technology. How does the government need to intersect with it? It's not about the government controlling it. We've talked about the sheriff node. That's a little bit of a kind of a lightning rod issue about what real role should the government play in transactional basis for the blockchain. And there are a couple of things about being voluntary and all these things, but that's going to be a forum for us to be able to hash that out. There's going to be some debate. Not everybody's going to agree on these things, but what do you see with the task force? What are you hoping to come out of that task force in the near future?
Yeah, one thing that we need to recognize is that incrementalism brings us wins. Now, what I mean by that is a lot of times when it comes, like we have huge goals here in Utah, right? We want to be the world's center of blockchain, but that's not going to happen overnight, and we're not going to get that accomplished in one legislative session. And this is the same idea when, like I said, when someone comes to me and says, hey, I have an idea, recognizing that taking steps towards your goal is still progress, right? For those of you that watch football, think of it as like getting a first down is not a touchdown, but you've made it closer to the end zone. And so we need to do that in government. And I think that as a task force, part of what we should do is map out where we want to be and then get the steps on how we get there, right? Every time we get a first down, let's celebrate, but then let's get back to the huddle and make our plan before we make it into the next round. And I think we do that, like I said, one step at a time. Let's look at one issue. Let's look at DAOs. Let's look at a sheriff node. Let's look at government recognition of digital documents.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things.
Yeah. There was a phrase I learned when I was first elected with a guy that I was serving with, Representative Greg Hughes, later became the Speaker of the House there. But, he used to always use the phrase, don't let perfect become the enemy of the good.
Absolutely. That's exactly.
One of my favorites too.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites. Actually, it's one of my favorites because it comes down to my trading days, right? For those of you that weren't with us last week or don't know me, I spent 20 years in dealing rooms all over the world, shouting and waving my arms around for a living. And one of the things I learned in that environment was exactly that. And in the latter part of my career, I was hiring and firing and running teams and things. And one of the things I used to stress to everybody from that perspective, because when you're trading, you have to know when to take a profit, basically. And so you have to, not letting perfect be the enemy be the enemy of good is really, really important, because otherwise you turn profits into losses really, really quickly. So I kind of learned that. And then as I transitioned and became more interested in crypto later in life, I realized that there were so many people out there who were doing just that in the crypto world. They had this image of this revolutionary technology coming in and all of a sudden taking over mankind and producing this kind of libertarian nirvana that they thought was out there and just had to be brought in. Great, but it doesn't work that way. Right. And I think that, you recognize that, obviously, Amelia, and you've kind of worked towards getting things actually. And this comes back to the difference I was talking about earlier about talking about things and doing things. And I do think partly it's a female mentality versus a male mentality. I know that's not a very PC thing to say these days, but I do think there's a difference in the way we approach things. I'm wondering if you're starting to see more women in the blockchain environment, or is it still just you out there waving your flag alone? Is it starting to actually? Is there any progress going on?
Oh, I love that question, and thank you for asking it, because this is actually one of the big things. Now, there are some women in blockchain and crypto, but there needs to be a lot more.
She's a big figure with the innovations around banking, which they're doing, trying to do in Wyoming. Obviously, you and others.
But the fact that we can name all of us on one hand, that's the problem. There are some really great powerhouses. Caitlin Long is a great example of it. But I can't tell you how many times I walk into an event to talk about crypto or blockchain, and I'm the only one there. And by the way, if I'm speaking at a conference and there's 20 presenters and there's 4 that are women, it's the same 4 of us at every single conference. Right. And I'm the only woman on the blockchain task force. I think there's 15 of us on the blockchain task force, and I'm the only woman. We really need, now that doesn't make me feel uncomfortable. I majored in automotive technology in college, was typically the only woman in most of my classes. I went to go work at Caterpillar, and I worked in the construction and trucking industries for 12 years. It was not uncommon for me to be the only woman in the room. When I got elected as an elected official, the very first elected officials meeting I had at the county, there were 10 of us around the table, and I was the youngest one and the only woman. And I am the first woman to ever be elected as a Utah County Commissioner. So while I'm used to being the only one there, the problem is we need to get a lot more done. So we need more women.
Yeah. And, I guess I don't want to make this remark about having a quota or something like that, but it shows that I guess I guess if you say there was tendencies among the gender, women are less risk takers, right? They're more about stabilization, right? And just the personalities are that way, and they're great multitaskers. Man, I can't think of 2 different things at once, right? But so in that aspect about teaching women about that it's okay to take risks, right? Because cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology and things that are new are risky, and more technology influence with women, right? And STEM focus and science, math, technology, all those things really going to help that move forward, because there are a lot of great female influences that influence technology because they have a different perspective, for sure. And it's not about a quota or about enough, or how many numbers, or does it need to be, is it 50% the right number, 20% of people in the room? It's not about that. It's about getting the best and the brightest of that perspective to help innovate around the uses of this technology and move that forward ubiquitously among the users and get better user adoption.
Yeah, well, and the key is just encouraging more women to go into the field, right? There was no barrier to entry in engineering when I went for women. In fact, they wanted and tried to recruit women. In fact, at one point, there was one semester that they had 2 scholarships available for women, and I was the only one who applied for the scholarship. So I got both scholarships. But if there's only one person applying, right? So we need to get more people to the table. Now, one thing that I learned being prior to being an elected official, I spent some time as a business consultant. And one of the things that I really learned as a business consultant is that women like to do things in teams. We're more like pack animals. And so one of the most important things we can do in the blockchain and crypto space is just encourage more women to come and support them when they're here. So we tend to need that support. As an elected official, you get a lot of criticism. And that used to be really hard for me. It literally has taken me years.
I don't know what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it has taken me years to take that criticism with a grain of salt. And so we need to be more encouraging, and we need to recruit more women.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, on our staff here, one of the heads of both our product development and our customer service, she kind of serves at both, because we like to get the influence from customer service into the products. She's been in crypto for years. In fact, I think she just commented here that there's more coming in. We've just hired some more people in our marketing department are women, so It's happening and it's getting there, but the influence is very needed, because they bring us just a different perspective, a different approach. It's needed, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, Harvard Business School did a review, and they found that executive boards, and companies that have executive level C-suite women perform at a higher level. And it's because they just bring a diversity of thought, right? Yeah. And so when you bring in diversity of thought, then you get better results. Now, here's the thing that I tell people when we talk about this, because I get asked about this a lot, having been a woman in a lot of male-dominated fields. One of the things is we need to stop saying we need more women and then expecting the women to show up and act like men.
Yeah, that is true.
And we do, right? A woman is a mom always, whether I'm in a public meeting or in a boardroom or at home, I'm always a mom. And there are times that I'm going to get phone calls from my kids' school, and I need to step away and take them. And we need to realize that for 1,000 years, women have been able to simultaneously cook dinner and tend to toddlers and get things done.
That's multitasking coming out.
Right.
There's also the broader point that if what you're seeking is diversity of thought and diversity of input, don't ask for people to all end up the same. Don't ask for homogeneity in that exact context. One of the things I love about SmartFi was, I pointed out the other day, I was on a call the other day, and there were people there from Tokyo, Marrakesh, London, me in Connecticut, Aaron out in Utah, literally from all over the world, male, female, black, white, brown, none of it mattered. Everybody was there because they were good at what they did, and everybody had, and as a result, we have this hugely diverse input of information and experience and knowledge that just makes even what are normally boring meetings fun, because you learn something. And that's, that's important in everything. And it's certainly important in something like crypto that's trying to move forward and really make change. You can't do that if you're relying on the views and the input of one small subgroup of people.
One thing that, I'm sorry. I was saying, one thing that I do to try to help model this, I oftentimes, if I'm in a Zoom meeting and I have my daughter with me, Genevieve, she's 3, I will put her on my lap in the Zoom meeting because she wants to be there, first of all. And as an elected official, I brought her to work with me every day for the first year of her life. That little girl has been everywhere. And one of the reasons I did this is because HR couldn't fire me, right? I was an elected official. Y'all just had to wait until the next. In fact, you can see right there, she walked on stage. I was giving a keynote at a conference to 1,000. And these people, that keynote right there that you can see, that was the Growth and Prosperity Summit for Utah. So we had the governor was in the audience, business owners, legislators, mayors, the president of the university was there, and I was giving a keynote about growth, and Genevieve walked onto the stage with me. And I just kept presenting, because people need to see that we can have moms at the table and they can still be moms and they can still get stuff done. And I do that because I want executives at companies to realize when one of their female employees has a toddler in the Zoom meeting, it doesn't mean she's not doing her job. She still is. And that's how we get more women to feel comfortable entering these fields.
Yeah, and I would say it's not even just relegated to kind of the consideration of women and mothers, but we've had single fathers, right? And I've worked at home since we formed SmartFi, and PowerBlock Coin and Blue Castle, all these companies we formed. Our company's basically 15 years old, but since 2008, we've been a remote company long before COVID or all of these things, because in order to get the best talent, you either had to allow people to work from home, wherever they were in the world, right? And make that possible. And that includes whatever their social family dynamic is, right? And so we've kind of tried to incorporate that. And there's some limits to that, but we've tried to make sure that that's an element of what we do at SmartFi. And that has informed our product development, absolutely, without question, making things more accessible online, the people that we hire, wherever we hire, all of those things. And so I think when crypto came along for us as a company, it was nothing new to consider that everything was going to be done remotely. There's not a single person in our company that sits in the same room, right? And they're worldwide. So
and that flexibility will attract more women. I remember when I was at Caterpillar, I was in the corporate world, but at Caterpillar, when I was working in Canada, I would wake up in the morning and I would nurse the baby, and then I would pump and I would do my emails from home. And then after the second feeding of the morning, I would nurse my baby again. And then I would head to the office at 10. And then I would be in the office between 10 and 2. And then at 2 o'clock, I'd get a text from my husband and he'd say, the baby's hungry again. And I would go back home and I would feed the baby. And then I would pick my son up from preschool. And then I would spend a little bit of time with my son. And then I would make dinner. And then after dinner, I would sit back down after and work again. And I would work until bedtime. So I would work in the morning, and then in the middle, and then take a break for kids. And then I would work in the middle of the day with my coworkers in the office. And then I would take a break. And then I would work until bedtime. And I was putting in just as many, if not more hours than my coworkers who were in the office from 8 to 5. But that flexibility allowed me to be a present mother.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what's important about blockchain technology and distributed ledger technology and digital assets, crypto, and everything that incorporated this industry. It allows that kind of flexibility, right? It serves the people. It's their interest and their purpose. And they get more control over their lives, more control over their schedule, all of these things. And that's really what attracted us to the technology for sure. I know we got a few more things. I want to get some of your opinions on some of the current news stories we're going to talk about. And so one of those is the ETH merge, right? And you may not have followed all the more of the financial side of a lot of this, because we're talking about other things that are applications inside the government, which are more document and information related. But the ETH merge basically was designed to take the Ethereum blockchain from a proof of work protocol that secured the network to a staking protocol, right? And in this, one of our colleagues here had a good observation, and it relates to also Tornado Cash. I don't know if you saw what was happening there with Tornado Cash, and we're getting down into the weeds a little bit, but censoring a blockchain. So the United States government didn't like what Tornado Cash was doing, came in, stepped in basically and said Tornado Cash is essentially a money laundering tool, or could be used like that, identified some problems with it, and basically shut it down, right? And with the ETH blockchain going to proof of stake, it basically kind of centralized the validators of the transactions, meaning that let's say you're Coinbase or another notable institution that has a lot of ETH on deposit, and you're putting that ETH up as a staking interest on a node, on the blockchain for the ETH blockchain now for the staking component. And because you're a centralized entity like Coinbase, can the government come in and now tell you to not validate a transaction on the blockchain and censor the transactions? And we've seen that. That's the layer 1 type of scenario, but we have layer 2 scenarios and layer 3 and any other layers above that, where a protocol built on the Ethereum blockchain, a government can come there and say, hey, censor this transaction, and or voluntarily, we've seen some applications censor Tornado Cash's wallet addresses. and not make them accessible to their application. So there's all these crazy kind of implications now, where with mining, although mining is more commodity intensive, like electricity, silicon chips, and it's these ways. Staking, although it might be more less commodity intensive, it does centralize some of the capacity when you have a large blockchain like Ethereum, where you can't really just call up a miner and say, hey, don't validate those transactions. You don't even know who the miners are, right?
Right.
If you know Coinbase is a big staker, and I'm just using that as an example, is a big staking entity for that, and they have government regulatory constructs that they have to answer to. That sets up this structure where government can exercise its power into the blockchain. And with the sheriff node that we're talking about at the task force, we want to set up an example of how the light hand of government can be used to resolve disputes, not enforce the government's will. And this is kind of this, again, these little slippery slopes that happen with the change of protocols. But I'm not sure if you are aware of some of these things, but it was a unique, interesting insight from Chris on our team. But maybe you could talk to that about this government intervention and the potential abuses.
I mean, keep in mind, thinking of my ancestry. I think it's literally in my DNA to be leery of anything government. And it's funny because as I teach my children this, they go, Mom, you are the government. I'm like, children, it's complicated.
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, but that's why I became in the government, was because I'm leery of government. No.
Yeah.
So this is kind of where the world of theory and practicality merge. And I think that it has to be done very cautiously. I mentioned earlier that I'm dual citizen with Canada. My father's Canadian, and I have two passports, a U.S. and a Canadian passport. And it scares the hell out of me that the Canadian government was able to seize the bank accounts of anybody who donated to the truckers' convoy.
Yeah.
And then they went further and started freezing their crypto wallets. That's very frightening. I love the idea that if we can build things into the framework, the name just slipped my mind. Who was the processor that when the Canadian government told them that they had to freeze the wallets, their reply was we can't. It's we literally don't have a way to do that. And it was almost conciliatory, where they were we'd love to help you, Canadian government, but the problem is it's just not built that way.
Confiscate people's property under your duress, but
right. Yeah, but it was we're so sorry, but we can't. We're a peer-to-peer network, and we just facilitate the software. We don't actually control any of it. I lean towards, we need to make it so that even if the government wanted to, they couldn't. Now, does that mean that some bad is going to happen? Yes. But that's where this risk reward comes in, right? Yeah. No. So as we move to, and we're start going to switching like Ethereum has, and I understand that there's a practicality aspect of it that we need to be cognizant of energy draw and green. But I have a friend named Derek who has worked with the Bitcoin Foundation. And he actually recently was in a debate at the Government Blockchain Association conference in DC, where he debated and said, I would debate that it takes no more energy than a Visa card. Because if you look at that transaction with the Visa, every one of these, every time you swipe your Visa, there's a machine sitting on the counter at that retailer. And that machine takes energy, and then it swipes it, and then it goes back to Visa's bank account that has huge server banks that processes that information. And then they have to go through and mail out a statement to my house. And then I go through and I pay that statement, and we're using bank servers. He's like, I would argue that really, if you look at the amount of energy consumed in the fiat world, that the cryptoverse doesn't actually use any much more energy than the fiat verse, right? Yeah, so that's one way to look at it.
Yeah, and there's some other discussions we don't have time to get into around security versus centralized. I mean, when you're staking, it becomes more centralized, and there's a bunch of other things that go into it. But nevertheless, it's what happened, and that's what happened with the ETH merge and with Tornado Cash.
Right.
There may be something Martin, we want to hit on. Let's talk maybe about the CPI data and how correlated crypto prices have been with stocks, equities, and the data in the economy.
Yeah, I mean, Amelia may be an engineering nerd, but I'm an economics nerd because I said I spent so much time in dealing rooms and stuff. And so I'm probably one of the few people in the country that gets excited by CPI and PPI data. For those of you who don't understand what they are, CPI is Consumer Price Index and PPI is Producer Price Index. Consumer Price Index measures the price of things that you buy as a consumer. Producer Price Index measures the price of the things that the people that make those things buy. Right, and the two diverged this week, which was actually quite interesting. So CPI was, up more than expected. Big, 1980s level inflation we still have, et cetera, et cetera. PPI, on the other hand, turned down, suggesting that commodity prices and that have started to, that those rises are in the past. A lot of people interpreted that as being, so we're past inflation. Actually, to me, what it means is that we've just transferred the driving force of inflation from the inevitable, which is the rise in material prices post-COVID and everything, to the possibly avoidable, which is the demands for higher wages that's prompted, and the understandably, I'm not criticizing people for wanting to maintain their standard of living, obviously, and the pressure on rent and this, that, and the other. So basically, it was a mixed bag of economic data. But the market reaction was interesting. The market paid a lot of attention to the bad news from CPI, and we had one of the worst days in the stock market for several years, and basically ignored the good news from PPI. I'm assuming because people think the way I think, as somebody who was trained in dealing rooms, that this isn't really good news. It's just kind of what happens. It's part of the cycle. But what fascinated me was that as that happened, the crypto markets followed the stock market.
Yeah.
Let's think about that logically. If we have an inflation problem here, then should crypto be going down as a result of an inflation problem if we accept the kind of OG view of Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation, this, that, and the other? Well, obviously not, right? And it's doing so because the two things are being correlated as risk assets. And there's an element of risk in crypto and there's an element of risk in stock. I get it. Right? I 100% get it in that respect. But to me, there's a couple of things a little bit worrying about that. One, it shows that Wall Street and the Wall Street view is dominating the crypto market, which I don't think is long-term going to be a good thing. But it's what we're living in now. But secondly, to me, and again, I don't want to turn this into an infomercial, but this is a SmartFi thing. And SmartFi has a token, the SmartFi token SMTF, that in a kind of a weird way, if you like, well, it's not weird because it was structured that way. You're going to tell us, Aaron, I'm sure. But the SmartFi token can actually benefit from that kind of short-term volatility, at least in theory, because what the SmartFi token is, proceeds from it are used to fund loans. Those loans go out to crypto companies and other small businesses when they need them. Now, when they need them typically is at times of volatility in the market, right? Because if you're a miner or a holder of crypto and you see but you have a long-term belief that we're going to the moon or whatever phrase you want to use, you don't want to drop from 20,000 to 18,000 to influence your decision. But you might need, you might need working capital, or you see that drop as a good way to buy more. So what you can do through SmartFi is you can take out a loan to do that and whatever. And the loan volume, if you like, the size of the loan book is what ultimately determines the pricing of SMTF. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Aaron. In terms
I would say value, right? Because there's differences between price and value.
Yeah, or the value of it. Yeah, the values are much better, and that's another conversation for another day.
It has real world backing, right? When you look at cryptocurrencies, they're based on a payment system, right? They're just moving value back and forth. But SMTF, tied to the structure of the way that it's issued and all these things, is actually tied to the value of what's securing a loan, which is
it has real utility,
real estate, whatever.
Yeah, it has real utility.
I know we're getting short on time. Again, we didn't want to make this a SmartFi commercial, but I want to illustrate one other piece of this. CPI data correlation to crypto, right? The bank stocks are actually going up because cost of capital is going up, which means banks will make more money, right? And they're lending institutions. So when equities and securities and in terms of like stocks and things, and they're coming off, bank stocks are actually going up. The value of the banks are going up and their profits, those kind of things. And that's actually really more like what SmartFi will be doing in that structure, because we're a lender, not a payment processor. We do process payments. We will do all those kind of things in that structure with a blockchain, but it will be inversely correlated to like CPI and other structures around that kind of basis. And we'll get more into that, later. But this weird, odd correlation of crypto, Bitcoin, and Ethereum, and all the other cryptos going down and basically mirroring stock and equities risk assets. When you have SmartFi that actually mirrors what is being held as collateral. So it's totally different, totally structured.
I would argue that
it's like I see it like a bridge. It's almost like a bridge between the traditional finance world and the crypto world that is considered a risk asset.
Yeah,
absolutely, and it's part of it's kind of I don't know. I don't want to say it's life, but it is. It's just this kind of thing that where people are right now. People are scared in the short term to take risk. Long term, that's not going to matter. In one of the things that I talk to people about all the time is the difference between trading and investing, short term view, long term view, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what we're seeing in crypto. If you believe in crypto, if you believe in the future of the blockchain, then this short term volatility doesn't matter. And the fact that it's tied to a fear the fact that it's completely irrational and illogical is even more of a reason to say on the dips, okay, well, let me look for something that actually is in the crypto world that can benefit here.
Well, let me tell you, I haven't looked at my Coinbase account in the last little while, but you know what other account I haven't looked at? My Fidelity IRA. I put them in the same category. I'm like, people say, how's your retirement doing? I don't know, because I don't want to know, because I don't know what my crypto assets are doing right now, because I don't want to look, and I don't know what my Fidelity IRA is doing, because I don't want to look. I consider them the same. Yeah.
For long-term investments, ignorance truly is good.
Commissioner Gardner, right? Hey, we're out of time. This was fantastic. Thank you, Commissioner Gardner, for being on. Yeah. Great insights. We're going to work together on the task force and some more meetings coming up, get some good stuff accomplished. And for all the viewers, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like us on all of the platforms and social medias that we're on. It helps us out with the algorithms and to get this information out there and available to people. I don't think there are a lot of people who understand that this type of information and these types of policymakers, elected officials are out there that actually understand blockchain and crypto, right? And this is an opportunity for you to hear about them and then to actually replicate what they're doing, run for office somewhere else in another state, county level, local level, whatever it is. But this is the impact and the inspiration that you could get from people like Commissioner Gardner that are involved in this. And so like us on there, get that word out there so that we can all help people understand how blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies are going to move forward in the future. It's happening. It's going to continue to happen. And you don't want to be left behind. So thanks everybody for joining us with the Tilton Talks Crypto podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.